My guest today is Marlon Williams, founder of Atlanta Blockchain Center. Marlon is a serial entrepreneur, starting and selling his first business at 25. He currently operates 4 different successful businesses. His company, Starter Labs, has helped raise over $45 million for blockchain startups and is the parent company for Atlanta Blockchain Center. We also get the tea on Immutable, the conference that will put Atlanta on the map. This episode is a powerful one because Marlon's mission of making Atlanta a blockchain hub is near and dear to my own heart, and he and his team have supported the growth of this show tremendously. LFG, baby, let's start vibing.
Zach French is a bar-certified attorney, and nothing expressed by Zach during Web3 with me shall be considered legal advice. All the opinions expressed by Zach and his guests are solely their own opinions. All content in Web3 with me is for informational purposes only. Zach and his podcast guests may maintain positions in the securities discussed during Web3 with me.
Welcome to the show, Marlon.
Thanks for having me. It only took us, 2 months to make this happen?
I was going to say closer to like 4 or 5 months, but it's okay. It's okay. All that matters is that we eventually made it happen. We have spent a lot of time together. I've gotten to know you pretty well. And love what you're doing in Atlanta. I can't wait to share it with the audience. So, as long as we're recording at some point, that's all that matters.
Agreed.
I usually start these interviews off with the same opening question to let the audience get to know you a little bit better. So we can start with your founding story. It doesn't have to be Web3 related, just kind of letting people know what makes Marlon Marlon.
Oh, man. Maybe because I was born in the Caribbean, so we, by definition, come from, small shacks, galvanized roofs, kerosene lamps. So coming to this country was like, wow. There's street lights, there are brick homes, but I think that's essentially it. I have a different perspective and view of the world just because of my upbringing in the Caribbean. So I think that's at the core. That's really what it is. It kind of explains everything else.
That's interesting. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Well, I think I appreciate things a bit more. And this isn't to say anything bad about, natural born citizens. But, being in poverty in the Caribbean is slightly different than in the US. So we get to just find a way to survive. My family grew up on a lot of natural foods that they grew in the gardens. I remember picking, mangoes and tamarind, kennips. These are things that we, as kids, would just go around picking off of a tree. If you wanted a snack, it's a tree right there. Go get it.
It's not a pantry. There's a tree.
Right. It's not a pantry. It's an actual tree, that you have to climb, and there's some coconuts, and which is pretty cool. I actually appreciate that experience.
Yeah, it sounds like it was very formative for you, and also motivating. I can't say that I've ever met anybody that's grown up in poverty in the Caribbean. I've met people who have come from other countries and grew up in lower socioeconomic areas, and there does seem to be kind of a chip on your shoulder when you come to America, where everything just seems so open and free, if you will. And for the most part, there are a lot of support systems there. Now, we can argue the adequacy of those, maybe not for this show, but maybe for Web3 one day to help with. But there's a different mentality that at least I've noticed. The people that were not born here and then come here, and then they just seize opportunity better when they get here. So I guess transitioning from your experience there and moving, did you move directly to Miami? I know you're from Miami or had spent a lot of time in Miami.
no. But just to add to your to your comment there, I think imagine growing up hearing, the United States is essentially the land of opportunity, and anyone that gets to go there, it's like one of the most amazing feats that you would ever accomplish in your life. So as a kid, I mean, that's what we're constantly hearing, in our culture. It's like, this is the land of the free, home of the brave. This is where all the amazing things happen. This is where you go to get rich. This is it. This is that. So most certainly when you arrive, it's like a blessing, right? So you're going to do the best that you can to take advantage of it. But no, my story is a little interesting because I grew up with my grandmother and my father. My mom was a model, and she would go throughout these islands modeling, and she met a Harvard professor in a neighboring island called Montserrat. And they ended up getting married, and he was a Harvard professor, as they said, just teaching biology at Harvard, and they moved to Boston. And after my grandmother's passing, my mom came back to get me. So that's how I ended up in the country. So we lived in Boston for, 5 years or so. Went to school in Boston, elementary school. It was actually my 9th birthday was 2 days later. It was snowing. I had never seen snow before. And it was just, I was wild. It's like, holy cow, this is amazing.
I'm going to need about 6 more jackets.
It was a lot of fun. And I made a lot of friends there and just spent 5 years there. And then, at 13, I moved to Miami. And I've been in Miami ever since.
Yeah. And I guess when you moved to Miami at 13, at that point, was your mindset shifting towards being an entrepreneur already? I know that you have a bunch of successful businesses now. When did you start to feel that kind of itch to create and build and be a builder?
Actually, I was introduced to, let's say 17 or so, 17, 18, because I was introduced to computer programming through a vocational course called Business and Software Applications. And, I figured I'd just try it out, and I ended up enjoying it, because we were taught programming in Visual Basic and Java for half of the course, and the other half were taught basic principles of business, sales, marketing, bookkeeping 101, that sort of stuff, basic business law. And I'm 16, so I'm like, wow, this is pretty interesting stuff, and I enjoyed learning, especially the programming side. And the more and more I got into it, I mean, I started getting addicted to programming because every time I wrote something in the computer, it would respond with what I'm telling it to do. And it was a very exhilarating kind of feeling. So I started immersing myself in programming more and more, started reading outside of the class, and this is 1999. So Bill Gates is, top of the world. Microsoft's doing their thing. Apple's kind of figuring things out. But nevertheless, they had a pretty significant impact on the industry at that point. And, I'm learning Windows 95 and Office and programming and VBA, which is Visual Basic for Applications. Microsoft Access and a bunch of other stuff. And it was just so cool to have all this technology at my disposal, but the programming is really what caught my attention. So as I started digging deeper and deeper and spending months reading, I got to a point where that's pretty much all I wanted to do, was just read about programming or software developers, entrepreneurial software developers. And it became this addiction. So when I finished the course, I told the professor, I said, look, I know what I want to do. I just want to be, I literally said this, I said, I just want to be a successful software businessman. That's it. I don't want to be anything else. So at this point, I'm 17, and that's when I kind of figured it out. That's how it begun.
That is like highly unusual for a 17-year-old to have that level of conviction. I think there are a lot of people in their 30s that are still trying to figure out exactly what their purpose in life is in terms of career and things like that. So you have this conviction early. You know you want to build. It's about the fact that you can build your own rules, right? And make the computer or the software do what you're telling it to do. What was the first thing you shipped? I'm interested. Do you remember?
Oh man. Well, from the course or just on independently?
Independently.
The first thing I shipped in production, I would say it was this medical software application. Because everything else prior to that was just mostly experiments and playing around. It wasn't anything production level. But the first thing I shipped came a few years later. So maybe 3 years later. And the way that came about, when I was 18, I started going to Miami-Dade College for computer information systems, and was acing the introduction to C++. I mean, I'm acing these things, right? Because it's easy at this point, having gone through the vocational path. And I started looking for a job the second year. Miami-Dade was a community college back then. Now it's one of the biggest four-year colleges in Miami. But I started looking for a job in software development, and I got hired by a startup in Fort Lauderdale. It was interesting because the two founders worked across the street at Motorola. They just opened an office right across the street from their job. They started staffing people. They had a sales guy first, and then they were looking for a junior developer, and they found my resume and they liked me for my, at least my education at the time, because I had no prior experience. And they would walk across the street literally at lunchtime every day and harass us. But it was a pretty interesting experience because for me, one, it was my first job in development, and two, it kind of utilized the skills that I had, which I was very strong in software development and preferred coding. But because in the vocational course I took the sort of soft skills, I was able to communicate with customers and support and partial sales and so forth, right? But I stayed there for about a year and a half or so. Went to another. At that point, it was very easy for me to find jobs in development. So I got hired as a senior software developer in Miami Lakes, a pretty large call center. And that's all we're doing. It was no interacting with customers. It was nothing. It was just straight up coding. So I missed the kind of first jobs interaction with customers and decided to build something similar. So that was really the first thing that I shipped, was a competitor to my first job. Nice.
And did you, I guess, are you still involved in that business?
No. It was acquired. It was acquired back in 2008 by them, actually, because we went through this whole lawsuit and so on and so forth.
But they did end up acquiring it.
Exactly.
That's awesome. So you realize though during this you're building what is making Marlon and today, and that is that you have this like rare ability, which I think a lot of tech entrepreneurs and VCs like strive to find, which is like you can code and you can talk to people, right?
Right.
I mean, those are, I'm a furious follower of Naval Ravikant. He basically boils it down to, if you have those two skills, or if you have one of those skills, you should learn the other one. You can do pretty much whatever you want.
Yeah, I agree.
That is, it's unique. It's unique, and it's hard to pick up the programming later in life because of the monotonous practice that it takes to learn how to do it. It's not like someone just picks up a keyboard and is like, I got this, right? Like they may self-teach themselves, but it takes repetitions, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The earlier you can get in, the better. That's what I would recommend to anyone.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we fast forward a little bit. You start and sold a successful business. You are, in 2008, I'm assuming you're around like 25, 30 years old. And yeah, 25 years old, which is, insane in and of itself that you've already sold a business at that point. And then you start to look into new things, I assume. What was your trajectory like then?
Well, the interesting thing is that I ran that company as a moonlighting operation because I stayed at the first job. I mean, that was what gave me the funding really to pay for the servers. And back then it was, you had to, have servers on premises, right? So everything was
no cloud.
No cloud. There's no cloud at all. I literally had to configure all of the Linux servers that I was using to record physician conversations and connect with the telephony infrastructure and so forth, and T1s and all these telecom devices and endpoints. So that funding needed to come from somewhere, and it was my day job, right, as a developer. So I was building this thing from 2003 to 2008 in the evening, run it in the evening. A lot of stuff spilled over at work, of course. I would get calls during my job, but in any event, so I'm 5 years into my day job now when I sold my medical software startup, and about 25 years old. When my boss found out, I got promoted to run the IT department at the company, and I did that for another 5 years. But, in between, I would be trying different things at night.
Always iterating.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's how I found out about blockchain. And then I started building a call center tech company called Cubicles. It was called Finero back then. But essentially, I stayed in, what we would call corporate America for the next 5 years. So I have 10 years of experience working at a company in corporate. And the evenings is really when I did a lot of my entrepreneurial activity. So that's sort of how it went down.
So let's talk about the blockchain. What was your entry point? What was your inflection point where you started looking into it and then went down the rabbit hole, as we like to say?
So it was interesting because as I was the director of information services now at this company, and I like being on top of my game, competitive and so forth, right? So, back then there were, I think TechCrunch was very early, but there was like InfoWeek and a few other, like Slashdot and other publications. So I found out about Bitcoin when it was initially announced, maybe a couple months later. I want to say early 2009. And as a developer at that point, I had written a lot of applications for the company I worked for. They had a lot of Fortune 500 companies as clients, and I'd written applications for Procter & Gamble, for the Marines, for all sorts, and White Castle, and you name it. So with the order processing systems, whenever I wrote code that would have e-commerce functionality, the payment portion was always difficult, or it wasn't as seamless as it could be because you had to integrate all these APIs into your product. So we knew like a lot of developers knew that ultimately there would be a way to process payments intrinsically, right, over the web without all of these intermediaries like authorize.net and all these other APIs that you could use into your platform for payment processing. So when I found out about Bitcoin, I wasn't surprised that something like that was being tested, because there were some prior attempts at creating something like Bitcoin, but it was the one that kind of got a lot of traction, right? So I just followed along for the next 3 years or so. One thing I did do very early on was I told one of my network administrators at the company to set up a small miner. So we used the server, put Bitcoin on there, started playing around with it, and he said it paid off his college tuition. It's like, Marlon, thank you so much for
Wow,
introducing
cool.
me. But my mind, and if anyone tells you that they knew that Bitcoin was going to be what it is today, I'd argue that that's false, because my mind personally, it was in building a very successful, large cloud-based software company. It was still very much into enterprise software and trying to create the next Salesforce, right? And I believe most of the tech entrepreneurs back then were. There were a few who saw Bitcoin and kind of went all in. But they're very rare to find. But I slowly got more and more involved over time. And when I left the company, my day job in 2013, that's when I was, fully independent, right? I'm no longer, like, my time is my time, and I spent it however I decided to. But I left the company to launch my call center software company. And that's when I got more involved in Bitcoin. That's when I started getting more vocal about it. I started emailing some friends. I think the market cap back then was about, I think it was like a 1.2 billion or something. And it's like a $120 or $140 for Bitcoin. And I just started getting more active in terms of following along. I got Gox because I had Bitcoins on Gox. But it was still sort of just this. I never thought about building I wish I did think about building an exchange, because I certainly had the skills to do it myself. But I didn't think about building an exchange. I didn't think about creating a wallet, right? I was thinking about my startup, my enterprise software company. Again, trying to get that to be the next Salesforce, right?
Yeah.
But my pattern has always been, and I had the core of what I did on a daily basis was what most of us would consider our 9 to 5, right? But in the evenings, that's when I always experimented with things. I played around. I tried different ideas. Even for the call center tech company I built, I started doing most of the code in the evening for that, because I still had this day job. And not only that, I was a director, so I was running the IT department, which increased the demand for my time. So I built the company I left to run full time in 2013 was built moonlighting as well. So now that I'm doing that full time, my blockchain curiosity and experiments took the moonlighting role. So while I'm running my software startup during the day, I'm playing around with blockchain at night. And when Ethereum was announced, that was when I really got more involved, because there I saw, and of course there were attempts to create your own tokens and so forth on Bitcoin. Like, I think Omni did it. There's Peercoin, Mastercoin. But when Ethereum came out, it really created this framework that allowed you to really create your own economy and token on the blockchain. So it became a bit more serious. I took it more serious and started playing around with smart contracts, kind of learning how the whole thing works. So that was how I got into blockchain. Really started more in 2013-ish.
Gotcha. That makes sense. It is. I agree with you. I imagine anybody that was like picked up Bitcoin and the white paper in '09 and told you that they were going to dedicate their whole life to this thing, like maybe like 3 people did that. You know, it's always easier in retrospect to be like,
Right.
yeah, totally new. I mean, you do hear a lot of the stories though, where people have gone through the cycles, right? And they may have left during some of these cycles.
Oh yeah.
But they eventually came back, right? Because there is this kind of unifying underlying philosophy that has like started to permeate because of this technology, that, you know, people start to follow it as an ideal as much as a technology. Which is very cool. So you're building SaaS B2B software at that point, right? Like I think we're in the SaaS ages at that point.
Oh,
yeah. Subscriptions, finally. You're not shipping new disks to anybody for them to update the software. And you are starting to take smart contracts more seriously. So let's fast forward. Let's talk about your first venture that you started that was Web3, as we call it now. You probably didn't call it that then, but you know, your first blockchain-based business. When was that?
Well, it was actually an attempt to incorporate blockchain into my existing call center business. So it wasn't. I never created a blockchain business separately as my first sort of go-to-market in the space. It was figuring out ways to rethink how the call center industry works from a staffing perspective. I had mostly focused on the technology infrastructure, meaning, you know, I built dialer software, call routing software, chat software, you know, software that facilitates communication between customers and their service providers. So when you call into Bank of America and you hear that interactive response, that's the kind of software that I built at my company. And so we always provided the technology component that a business would need to service their customers for sales support, etc. So you started thinking about the staffing aspect of the call center space, right? I recall a lot of the problems that call center agents had. It dealt with proper compensation, just the job being sort of monotonous, and it just wasn't exciting for them. You know, majority of call center agents, there's a huge churn in that industry, and the majority of them just not happy with their jobs. And so it was really studying, you know, trying to figure out if there was a science behind why. Because obviously that results in dissatisfied customers. I mean, these are the people who are the front lines of your organization, and they're responsible for a significant part of your revenue and customer satisfaction. So I thought that incorporating an incentive engine, so replacing the supervisor as, you know, the source of truth for your compensation, for your rewards and bonuses and so forth. If you would do that with smart contracts instead, it could streamline the call center industry, at least from, you know, staffing perspective. So that's what I started building.
What year is this?
This was 2016.
Okay. So we're not quite ICO boom level, but
Yeah.
people are starting to build dApps on
Right.
Ethereum. Yeah.
Started playing around with that idea then. So that was and then started incorporating that, pieces of it into the platform. So it was the first sort of commercial integration of blockchain into anything that I did outside of my moonlighting experiments. The the first independent blockchain.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
How did your customers take that news or that offer, I guess, once you started to build it? Was it, and how did you frame it? Right? This is early days blockchain. I don't know if we have a bad name for blockchain yet, because maybe nobody knows what it is. But how did you actually like frame that new product offering for your customers?
How did they take it? They didn't quite understand. A couple sort of got it, but it was very difficult. Excuse me. It was very difficult to explain, even for me. And I think I'm pretty good at breaking down technical to non-technical people.
Been doing it for a few years at that point.
Exactly. So, ultimately the the pitch was focused on the organization. The initial pitch, which was, as a call center, you're spending a lot of resources, a lot of capital paying agents for idle time, right? So they're sitting there idle most of the time. And when they're not on a call, you still have to compensate them. What if you could reallocate their idle time and share it in a network so that other companies could use their talent and you get a portion of the pay? That was the enterprise pitch. Because, I was trying to figure out a good angle into the organizations. I thought that would be the best way, which is essentially selling your paid staff's idle time in a decentralized network. But in reality, what the core mission was to address this staffing and customer and employee dissatisfaction issue. That's a huge issue that I felt if anyone can solve it, then it would be a pretty significant and successful organization, right? So that's how I framed the entire thing. And again, to a couple, they kind of got it in that way, but they weren't really sold on that idea as much. So that's, that was pretty early. That was very early. It's arguably, especially in that industry, there's no one that has built or even attempt to build any sort of blockchain integration to help address the issue of, high agent attrition and just dissatisfied customers.
Yeah. So it's still a problem.
It's still a problem. Yeah, absolutely. I had after you spend so much time in an industry, kind of get burned out sometimes,
It's boring.
Right. I started enjoying the blockchain development side more and the challenges there than trying to solve an ages old problem of call centers and customer dissatisfaction and agent attrition, which is still a problem that needs to be solved. It's just one of those things from my perspective that it wasn't the right time. But I have an amazing product. companies still around offering the core call center tech that we started back in 2013, but the blockchain component and the entire sort of lease your staff's time to a decentralized network, and then, um, compensate agents based off of their on-chain metrics. That still hasn't caught traction yet.
It's interesting. Yeah, when I'm thinking about what quantitative measurements you could use and put on chain in order for that to be measurable, right?
Oh, I have all of that defined. I know it very
Yeah.
well.
I figured you have. You didn't just talk about it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful work of art. I mean, what I built is really, really an amazing. It's like I just love it. In terms of like software and products and creating one of those things is just a beautiful. Um, I don't know how to explain it. I think it's it's like an artist and how they see their work in the end. Although no one, a lot of people don't see the value yet. I think it's certainly going to be um, a huge issue in the future where a product like this could solve.
I love that analogy. Actually, you're already building it when we're talking earlier about falling in love with coding because you are creating. You are building your own little world in a way, right? That like follows the rules of your code, and now you have this product that you have so much conviction in, that is good, but the market's not ready for it yet, right? And you aren't, it's on the shelf per se, right? But like it's not like you walked away from it and you're like, that was a bad idea. I shouldn't have done that. You'd still have confidence in it. It's nice, man. I can imagine with the artists, they go through the same thing. Like maybe their art style at this point, and I'm speaking of digital art pre NFT boom, right? Is just something on Flickr or something you share on Instagram, but there is an unlock moment, and I think your idea is that it will eventually unlock, right? And people will see the alignment between these core problems that I'm sure every single person that is in your business sells on, right? These pain points. Or do you have issues with call center retention? Do you have issues with customer satisfaction, right? Like people are still selling on those pain points. They just aren't ready for it to be solved the way that you're solving it. So that's really cool. So you're doing that. You're still running that business. When does Starter Labs come in? And can you explain a little bit to the audience about what Starter Labs is?
Well, there's a lot that happened between then and Starter Labs, but I'll quickly kind of walk through what transpired during that gap. But I again got more and more involved in just the blockchain space. It's starting to take up a lot of my time in the evenings, and I'm finding myself in different groups and organizations that are experimenting with different ideas. And now in 2017, there's just ICO boom. There's a ton of different projects. There are.
Are you participating in this, by the way?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So you're buying some of these ICOs,
right?
Gotcha.
And there were just a ton of different projects, and my my view was or preference was always projects who were trying to solve issues with scalability, because I always, again, at that time had a view of an enterprise and SaaS and cloud, right? So it was, what blockchain could I use to actually build a large scale application? and Ethereum showed at the time that that wasn't it. So there are a lot of other ideas like EOS that try to address those problems, right? So I'll kind of fast forward to that because I know we're running out of time. But essentially, I got more involved in the EOS ecosystem, and at launch, things didn't go quite as planned. I mean, the software was very performant, but there were some flaws with just delegated proof of stake, where it's a proof of stake network, and you could essentially give someone else could hold you can continue to self-custody your tokens, but you could delegate the power of those tokens to someone else, thereby giving them more power. So that caused a lot of issues with the EOS network. And a group of guys and we decided to launch our own. So we worked together with a little over 100 contributors, and we built our own blockchain called Telos, which is still around today and actually doing pretty well, to address some of the issues that we felt that EOS had.
How did you find these contributors?
Just as we're all ex-EOS guys at the time, essentially.
So you're like, were you in a Discord, or like how were you communicating and stuff at that point?
Yeah, Discord wasn't. Discord really wasn't that big back then. So it was mostly Telegram.
Okay.
Yeah, mostly Telegram. So fast forward, we launched Telos. I built the official wallet for it, called Squirrel. Helped contribute to some of the chain code. I was actually the co-chair of the software working group. We organized into different working groups. It was marketing, it was software, it was this, that. And
were you helping organize them? I'm actually fascinated by this communal, like to take 100 people to build something. How were you, like, was it kind of your vision in terms of like, we need this working group, we need this working group?
No, it was collective decision making, right? And because we had I think the hardest part was initially convincing people that they need to join us and not EOS, because it was going in the wrong direction. That was the toughest part. And then, as more and more people got on board, they saw the vision. Some of the concerns started materializing on the EOS side. It was an easier sell to get more people on board. But then, we had marketers, community builders, people who've done some of this stuff in the past join and materially contributed their skills in that way, saying, hey, we should organize in this way, we should. So it was certainly collective. It was a DAO before DAOs were really popular, so that's essentially how we self-organized. But so we launched that, had a great launch, haven't been down a single time to this day.
100% uptime, one of the best use cases for blockchain, unless you're Solana.
Well, I didn't want to say no names.
Yeah, right.
and so at this point, I'm doing, call center business, helping to launch Telos and evenings mostly. And after launch, I started, we're all trying to figure out how to help, promote the chain. So we'd use our own network and personal connections to bring into the ecosystem. For example, I brought in Michael Turpin and a few other people, that have been in the industry for a while as well. So we're all just contributing at that after launch to the business development of the chain, of course, and we're still managing and operating the chain as well. And now it's 2018. We launched end of 2018. 2019, there were more projects that were sort of like wax that were sort of getting off of Ethereum and trying to figure out to build their own chain. Excuse me. And because of some connections and mutual friends, I got into Wax. I helped them. I became the chair of their new department they call the OIG, which is the Office for Inspector General. It's essentially setting and establishing the rules for the node operation for the Wax blockchain, right? How a node operator is compensated. What are the structures and best practices that they need to apply? How fast does the server need to be able to process blocks minimally to be considered a valid operator? There's so many rules that we put together. So myself and two other guys established those initial rules that runs the Wax blockchain today. And started seeing more, like Ethereum started getting back into play with some DeFi experiments like Aave and Compound. And so this is now, late 2019. And then you hear rumors about other new chains coming out, like Solana. So you started looking at Solana. At this point, by the way, I had established a separate company called ZenBlocks that focuses on node operations and developing cryptocurrency wallets. So if you go to zenblocks.io, it's actually my blockchain operations company. So we started supporting different blockchains. We started this new chain started coming out, like FIO and others, and we would get into into those organizations and would help them out. As DeFi started getting more traction, I started looking at ways that I could leverage the traction coming back to Ethereum into the blockchains that I was supporting, like Telos and FIO and others. And it became interesting because there were just a lot of experiments with decentralized finance happening. Now this is like early 2020. Solana wasn't out yet. I had actually joined the Solana testnet. I was one of the early, my company, ZenBlocks, was one of the early node operators on Solana testnet. And, we had our hands in so many things at that point. And again, for me, it was, it started moonlighting, but then it started slowly seeping over into my day-to-day work. So in my day-to-day work, I started offloading some of those responsibilities to my team at the call center software company and started sort of doing less of that and then letting my team run it, right? And I'm doing more and more and more blockchain-based work. So DeFi 2020, again, the experience with various protocols was ongoing. I started creating some myself, just seeing what what the rave was all about, and just to kind of learn how it works on the inside. And around this time, that's when the DeFi boom started happening. This is like summer 2020.
DeFi summer. Yep.
DeFi summer. So DeFi summer, and then around the fall, so many crazy things that happened just within those 2-3 months that it was just concerning. I mean, people were getting rugged. There were fake projects being created. Ethereum started showing signs of slowing down again, having performance issues because of all of the activity in DeFi that was happening, which caused a lot of the new EVM-based chains in particular to thrive. So we saw chains like Binance Smart Chain, and any chain that supported, you had Polygon and so forth. Any chain that supported EVM really started taking some of the total value from Ethereum and users from Ethereum. But as these chains started growing with traction, there was a ton of fraud and bad actors came along with it, and that's where the idea for Starter came from. We figured if a new chain is launching and it had a decentralized launchpad where its users could come to find good projects, and investors could, developers could find investors, then it would reduce the likelihood of all of this fraudulent activity that was happening. So I created an initial version of Starter in a very, very neat way, but effectively it was created to be a Kickstarter for new EVM chains. And I launched it on Binance Smart Chain over a weekend. And it just,
just like a weekend.
like 20,000 people signed up. Like right away. It just literally just went like this.
Yeah.
And it was just one of those things that was right product at the right time.
Marlon, the original moon boy.
Yeah. So that was started. And then, we grew so fast. I mean, we had a ton of investors join the network. We had a ton of developers join the network looking for funding. And over time, we ended up helping projects raise over 45 million through our platform. We took a percentage of all the raises, obviously, but we also started offering supporting services like marketing, community building, development, tokenomics, advisory. And we became this one-stop shop for launching and funding projects. And so much so that, by the end of 21, Q4 21, there's this site called Cryptograph. They rank projects, they rank different things in crypto. They ranked Starter as the #1 launchpad in the entire industry, just based off of the ROI for the projects that went through. Now, of course, we're in this bear market now, and most tokens are down 90+%. But that's how quickly we had built Starter. During the last bull market.
Yeah, within the last couple of years,
right?
And saw it grow very quickly. So I guess you've got Starter. Starter's doing well at this point. It's not a bear market yet. When does the idea for Atlanta Blockchain Center, which is how we know each other, pop into your head?
Well, I try to think ahead as much as possible, right? Like, we can't predict the future. But we can certainly contribute to creating it. And I knew that, just based off of historical data, the bear market or a bear market will come. It always does. And a bull will ensue, and then a bear. And then, at some point, perhaps as the industry matures, the pattern will change. But based off of the last three, this is most likely to happen again. And I started planning as such, right? Meaning, started thinking about different ways to expand our offerings and services and the things that we did. So we built, at this point, I had 18 employees working at Starter. We built, 6 developers on the team. So I'm no longer doing all of the coding. I would do a lot of the code reviews and so forth. But I started directing the dev team to build NFT Launchpad. Started directing them to build a GameFi product called Starchy, which is really, really great what we've done there. And started looking at real world applications. So what can we do, in the real world that complements everything that we're doing in a decentralized world, which is something like ABC. But it never pulled the trigger. But it was a desire, and I knew that in order to establish ourselves for long term as a launch pad for blockchain-based projects, it would behoove us to have an in-person presence somewhere. Again, one of those things with timing, right time, right product. At this point, I'm looking at other places to live, mostly for family reasons. And we're considering Atlanta. Had been to Atlanta, obviously. Miami's only an hour and a half away. So kind of knew a bit about it. I joined some of the blockchain meetups that they had back in pre-pandemic days, and would come here back and forth, but never really looked at it from an economics perspective, right? And whenever I do anything as an entrepreneur, I'd love to understand the market. I love to understand, the fundamentals, be like outside of whatever product or idea that I have, right? So I started looking at Atlanta in that sense, like, what is this city? What's unique about it? And started discovering those amazing stats that we are all aware of, like the fintech capital, 70% of financial transactions being processed through this infrastructure. 16 or 17 of Fortune 500 companies have headquartered in Metro Atlanta. ATL Hartsfield being the busiest airport in the world, number 1. Georgia Tech, number 4 engineering school, in the country. And these are stats that blows out a lot of other cities. I'm not going to be specific about which ones, but I was just blown away. And then so Atlanta confirmed to me that it's a great place to build, especially if you're an entrepreneur, and especially if you're in tech. But the second most important metric was its lack of a real blockchain, a cohesive blockchain community, right? And coming from Miami, whenever I go back home, there's just too many things to do. I get invited to so many things. I don't tell certain people that I'm coming back because
you don't want to feel
everyone wants to see me. They want me to come here or come there. And it's just too many things happening in crypto in Miami, saturated.
Yeah.
So here's this city with these amazing stats as an economy. Here's this city that is a fintech capital of the country and arguably the world in terms of, the activity and payment transactions and the presence of fintech companies headquartered here. And then here's this city that isn't prioritizing blockchain in any material capacity. So I said, damn, that idea for having an in-person incubator, this is the best place to do it. And that's essentially how the Blockchain Center came to be.
I remember receiving the article my friend sends me as I'm getting into Web3 of about you starting Atlanta Blockchain Center in the Atlanta Business Chronicle, and then cold DMing you and being like, "Yo, what's up? Like, I want to be a part of this," because like there's so little opportunity to meet up with people in real world unless you're willing to go do the whole conference thing, which I'm not discouraging. I've enjoyed myself at conferences, but it's so temporary. It requires a lot of coordination, but having a mainstay, a place to go, to meet people, to get educated, it was needed. It was needed. And every time I come up to the Atlanta Blockchain Center, I meet at least one more new person, right?
Yeah.
What you have built there is it's amazing, to say the least. We're recording this episode in November. I will be releasing it in December, but I can safely say of my 30 some odd episodes that I've recorded that in some, maybe not direct, but like maybe second order related, almost half my episodes have come from you in the place. And so I know that the episode is about you, but just this is amazing what you're doing here at Atlanta Blockchain Center, and the approach is a long-term one too. It's not like you're hopping in and trying to get everybody to come, buy office space there and like do all this stuff. Like you're like, all right, what's first? Education. And like, as you know, with my new focus for this show, it is all about changing that perception problem. And the way that we do that is by providing safe environments for kids and adults to enjoy themselves. Right. I always see I've met your sons up there. It's really cool to see that they are participating in the Atlanta Blockchain Center. And I brought my kid to Web3 ATL this past weekend. He was a hit. I don't think many people see a 5-year-old at these conferences. But it's really plugging the gap, right? And I know you have a big vision for Atlanta based off of these factors that you've talked about. What else can you share about the Atlanta Blockchain Center and your vision that you feel like would help the audience understand why this is so important?
Oh man, I love to discuss that. I think, having now, experienced Web 1, Web 2, and now Web 3, I can confidently say that blockchain technology is going to touch everyone's lives in the future in a very big way. And just like the technologies before it will usually go unnoticed by a significant portion of the people that it's going to impact. But that's great because it leaves this huge gap of opportunity for people like us, people like, you with your education initiative and podcasts, and, so it's going to transform our lives same way some Web 2 businesses have in Web 1. Now, I mentioned how powerful Atlanta is from an economic perspective and culture and so forth. And I really believe that we have the power to elevate Atlanta, at least, in the eyes of industry builders and investors in Web3, to be a place that they want to come and invest their next, and build their next businesses. But it's going to take a lot of effort, right? It's going to take a lot of collaboration. With what you're doing is amazing. What we're doing at the Blockchain Center, what A New Way is doing, what Blockchain Georgia Tech is doing, Planned Profit. I mean, there's so many people here that are passionate about Web3, and in their own way, they're contributing. And it's the same thing that happened in Miami. Again, I recall when it was very little to no activity happening in Miami around blockchain and crypto. It wasn't this sudden boom overnight. These were things that were happening behind the scenes. And when we got the right people involved, more and more, like the mayor of Miami, that's when, non-Miamians started paying attention. But there was a ton of work being done behind the scenes. And the same thing's happening here in Atlanta. And the reason I think is important is it's home now. I love to live in winning cities. Blockchain is all I'm going to be doing for the foreseeable future. I have no interest in anything else like Web2 or, all the traditional like SaaS and cloud, and absolutely no interest in any of that. It's either blockchain or bust for me. So naturally, I'd like to see the community thrive. And I believe that having a physical facility, a pillar that you can always point to say that is an organization, an entity that's helping drive blockchain forward in Atlanta is key. And the compensation will come later. We think that we're going to launch some amazing projects through the Atlanta Blockchain Center. The work that we set out to do, although we've done a lot in the last 5 months, we haven't even touched on it, right? Mostly because of the market climate today. But Atlanta Blockchain Center has proven to be a great source of education and networking. We have yet to prove ourselves as a great source for fundraising and investing, and that's next. So pretty soon in Atlanta, companies are going to, aspiring or established founders who are building in Web3 can say, hey, I can go to ABC and find funding. I mean, we're not going to fund everybody, but there's a process for that. There's an established process to raising funds for your projects in Web3.
It goes back to your word launchpad, right? Like it isn't a retail VC shop where you could just come in and order funding, right? This is a place where you can go to find the network that you need to be successful. That's what I hear you saying.
Right. Absolutely. And our success to me isn't, we're not going to, look at the next year or two to gauge success. We're really looking at 5 to 10 years. I'm just going to keep busting my ass for the next, 4 years.
I'm there with you.
To help contribute and elevate the city to be a blockchain innovation hub, and then figure out, okay, what am I going to get out of this now, right? Because now it's purely investing in Atlanta. The pay would come later. The last thing I would like to mention that I think is equally important is one of the biggest initiatives that spearheaded the movement in Miami was a conference, an industry conference, and it was a North American Bitcoin conference. And that's why next summer we're going to be hosting a conference called Immutable. So Immutable conference is going to be held at the Fox Theater downtown. We've been working on this stealthily for the last 2 months. We have almost 40 speakers already and 10 sponsors. Lots of activity. We have a website. We haven't publicly announced it yet. We have a full agenda. The first day before the opening, we're going to have a tour of Atlanta, taking VIPs to Atlanta Tech Village. And all these names I'm going to mention, they already agreed, by the way. That's how far we are into this thing.
Love it.
Atlanta Tech Village. Then we're going to take them to ATDC. We're going to take them to Peachtree Corners. We're going to go to ABC, of course. We're going to go have lunch at Twin Peaks. Then we're going to go have an open party at ATV on the rooftop to kick off the conference. And the next day, we're going to go to the Fox, and we're going to have amazing sessions. Jeff Garsick is coming back. We have Dennis Lockhart, who's the former CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. We have a ton of industry insiders, of course, folks like Justin Daniels, and just so many other people on board already, that this is going to be huge. This is going to help bring eyes that's outside of Atlanta, that's involved in love blockchain, to start looking at the city, because that's part of the formula. It's part of the formula of elevating this metro area as an innovation hub for blockchain. So our weekly events will continue. Our incubation will continue. And this large conference is going to be sort of the culmination of all of that. But I think one of the most important parts of the conference for me will be the pitch fest, because all the companies that we incubate, they're going to pitch at the competition. They're going to compete at the pitch competition, and that's when we're going to start funding our first 1 to 3 companies. We haven't decided. We have Tim Doors at Techstars. He's going to help prepare them for the pitch fest to get their pitches right. He's also going to be a judge at the pitch fest. I mean, just sharing some alpha with you, with showing you how much detail has already gone into this, without announcing it yet officially.
You got a few weeks between this recording and launch too, so if we need to go back and add a few moderators or speakers there that happen to run this show, there's also room for that. So
sounds good.
No, man, it is. It's all jokes aside. It's a trajectory, right? Like, you are building the trajectory to go up and to the right. It starts with figuring out how serious people are here, and the people that show up week after week at the Atlanta Blockchain Center, contributing to growing that network, providing a good experience there, which, I feel like every time I've been there, which is quite a bit, anytime I can get my wife to agree to let me run away for 6 to 8 on Thursday, I'm there. And everybody is so enthusiastic. I talked to people last night when we're recording this in November, but last night they were part of those early groups, part of the ones that you were going to. And they were like, what happened to those? But now they have this, and they're so excited to have this. So, big pat on the back to you and Angela and the rest of the team at Atlanta Blockchain Center. I'm really excited about the conference, contribute in any way that you'll let me contribute, because I too agree. I love this freaking city. Like, I do. I'm born and bred this. In fact, just a funny aside, I own season tickets to the Atlanta United. And everybody's like, are you a huge soccer fan? I'm like, no, not really. I'm actually a fan of anything that unifies Atlanta. And all puns aside, this is the first time we've ever had a team in the city where everybody's a fan, because everybody's a transplant here, right? And to me, that's what's important, is to watch this city grow. Because when I grew up here, it was like just a bunch of suburbs. There was it wasn't like a desirable place to live. But in the past 10 years, Atlanta's changed. It is a mecca for culture, for hip hop, for just like diversity in general. I get reverse culture shock when I go to other cities. I'm like, where is it? This is like all white people, right? Like, this is like really boring. Atlanta has so much vibrance and depth to the city. So thank you for adding this on top, right? To add the technology, the future, to bring the futurists into the city is magical, man. So thank you, Marlon. We are nearing time. So I do want to wrap this up. My traditional closing questions, I have 2 of them. The first one is, how do you describe Web3?
It's simple. It's the age of our digital lives where we get to contribute and control a large part of it, a larger part of it than we have in the past. I mean, it's really that simple. We can get into the weeds about digital ledger technologies, distributed ledger technologies, and this and that, and consensus algorithms and so forth. But the majority of people aren't going to give a shit about that. What they're going to care about is when they realize that this social media network that they're using, that's getting that's getting traction, is compensating them for being part of the network. They're going to incrementally go towards that. I mean, it's Web3 is going to naturally sort of get into people's lives in ways that they won't expect it. But it really is that simple.
I love that. And I think it is important to avoid, unless there is a purpose behind the developer speak, the consensus, the trustless aspect, the nodes like that. That is all part of it and what makes it possible. But for people to understand it, like in the mainstream, they don't necessarily need to know that part of it. I think that the industry's been way too focused on it to begin with, which is fine. That's how it starts with tech, right? It's the reason the tech exists is because developers. And so developers are going to form a lot of the early narratives and framing and terminology and stuff like that. But it's exciting to see it growing and seeing institutional adoption with Starbucks and Reddit that are really solidifying the space as a legitimate improver of previous experiences, right? So my final closing question's forward looking. I ask, where do you see yourself in the next 6 to 12 months? Then where do you see yourself in the next 5 to 10 years? And Web3. Sorry, I don't know why I didn't say that.
In Web3. In the next 6 to 12 months in Web3, I would hope to have invested in, 3-5, companies in Atlanta that are aspiring developers creating things in the space. I mean, that is how, outside of the blockchain center and everything else that we're doing, the conference, etc., I would like to have supported projects for aspiring entrepreneurs building the next Web3 based projects, right? And even beyond that, let's get more products out there that are local, right? The students at Georgia Tech that are building some amazing things. Let's get them funded. Let's get them out there. We need more legitimacy in the space. We need less of what we've seen over the last 2 quarters and more trust and, just real world ideas by real world people who have moral values that they live by, and they just want to contribute positively to the space. So those are the kind of people I want to see ABC support, and that I personally want to invest in over the next 6 to 12 months and beyond. The next 5 to 10 years, I'm going to be 50 years old then. So I will most likely be spending half of my day reading. And the other, maybe 25% of that actively contributing to Web3, because in the next 5 to 10 years, there would be enough traction where it would be self-organizing, developing. And a lot of my efforts, wouldn't be needed on a daily basis. It would be much more strategy, networking, connections, that sort of stuff. So 25% of that, my time would be spent doing that, and the other 25% with family. Hopefully I can, I don't want my fiance to hear me say that part. 50% and you give 25%.
Hey, listen, 25% is pretty good, man. We're awake for what, like 12 to 15 hours a day. That's like 3 or 4 hours. Right. It's not bad. And then I guess in the industry in 5 to 10 years, and be as audacious as you want, where do you see Web3 in terms of its impact on our lives, and how integrated is it into our lives?
In the next 5 to 10 years, we're certainly going to have, and this is without a doubt, clarity around the regulatory environment in Web3, and that's by intrinsically going to allow more creativity to happen. We're going to see a ton of different. That's when you're going to see a lot of the sort of Web2 wave come in, because now it isn't as scary to build on blockchain as it is today, right? I mean, there are a lot of things that we were building and we had to do anonymously or in other ways to kind of hide our identity, when it's nothing bad we're doing. It's just, there was a lack of, and still is, lack of regulatory clarity. And the regulatory climate is going to be known. And we're going to see a lot more, Web2, the Web2 development community and the Web2 world come into Web3 in the next 5 to 10 years.
It's awesome.
In waves.
In waves, yeah. And there's a big gap there. Jonathan King, who's come to ABC before and was at Web3 ATL, talks about the less than 1% of 31 million developers worldwide that are actually spending their time in Web3.
Right.
So it's great to hear that. I agree. You need some certainty around this for people to take a plunge. Some people are willing to take it early, right? And those are the people like yourself and myself that are okay operating in the gray area. But in terms of engineers, the people that are really going to build the future of Web3, like they need a little bit more certainty around the regulatory climate before they start building these products that are highly financialized.
Right.
So yeah, Marlon, this has been awesome. I feel like I've gotten to know you really well during this, even though I've spent a lot of time with you already. I really appreciate the time. Any closing thoughts that you want to share with the audience before we sign off?
Get involved in Web3. And stay involved. It's going to continue to change the world, and you're going to miss out on a great opportunity. That's it.
Cool. Thanks for tuning in to Web3 with me. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please hit the subscribe button on YouTube or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you want to connect with me personally, you can find me on Twitter @Zach_French_.